And thank you for joining this school session on wellbeing in the built environment. Please be aware that the session is being recorded. My name is Claire Bradbury, and I lead our programme of work in the school on social value and wellbeing. I'm also a writer, and I'm currently working on a book project that's focusing on quality of life in cities, which feels at times deeply ironic. It wasn't intended to be a lockdown project in a pandemic, but that's what it's become. But no matter what angle I look at this, whether we're looking at it from the lived experience of the individual or through the eye of businesses or our institutions, the issue of wellbeing is fundamental to our built environment. 2020, and unfortunately it feels that 2021 is the same, has reminded us of the magnitude of consequences when several of our major crises converge. We find wellbeing now at the forefront of our consciousness because we can all personally identify with the impacts arising from loss of health, jobs, and freedoms. Unlike other crises, this one has forced a collective reckoning that building health, human health, and planetary health are all deeply interconnected. So wellbeing offers us an alternative framing of sustainability challenges, and it's gaining traction precisely because it's anchored in this human experience. As individuals, we tend to care a lot about our own well-being and about that of our friends and our families, but this isn't always manifest in a corporate context. And often the further along the supply chain we go, the more distant our connection becomes to the ecosystems and people underpinning it. So taking a wide-angle view of well-being is an important first step to taking the right action. And if we've got any hope of building back better, and we're hearing a lot of that rhetoric at the moment, we need an empathetic built environment, one that unlocks creativity and productivity and enables health and happiness within the population as a whole. So we have a fantastic panel of speakers today, all of whom are going to give us some slightly different perspectives on wellbeing. So we'll hear from Katrina Brady from the World Green Building Council, Anna Hollyman from the UK Green Building Council, Tim Francis from Grosvenor, Britain and Ireland, Chris Layton from Airlite, and Sam Hall from SI Partnership. So we're going to hear from everybody for about 10 minutes. And we'll either take Q&A as we go, or we'll take it at the end, depending on how dynamic you all are in the chat box. And this is very much an open invitation, please, to get involved, ask as many questions as you like, so that we can all learn as much as possible from our wonderful speakers. So before we kick off, I just want to give a very short, potted summary of the Wellbeing Special Interest Group that the school ran last year. So the group convened partners, some of whom you'll see on the screen, from across the built environment, so including development, infrastructure, construction, home building, facilities management, huge breadth of perspectives. And our activities were guided really by the principle that we can't talk about a healthy, climate resilient, inclusive future without looking at the whole value chain. So the objectives of the group were to demonstrate the business case for making investments in wellbeing and gather evidence of the impacts where these were available, to communicate the key trends and the drivers underpinning the wellbeing agenda, and to develop open source learning materials available on the school that reflect current practice, but also drive emerging best practice on wellbeing across the built environment. Our observations showed that a holistic understanding of wellbeing in the built environment industry is emergent, and indeed it has been accelerated over the last year, but it's not yet mainstream. So as such, we're seeing considerable variation in how wellbeing is addressed, be it at an organisational level, at project level or site level. But action on wellbeing doesn't need to be complex or expensive. We observe that effective interventions can be simple and proportionate, which also means that they're then available to businesses of all scales. Addressing wellbeing at scale will be made more effective by cross-sector partnerships and knowledge sharing, especially because we're at such a nascent stage as a sector in terms of how we consider wellbeing. And a body of case studies is available as part of the report, and you'll see the thumbnail of Wilmot Dixon's case studies up on the screen. We're so grateful to all of the partners who've already submitted case studies. If you have one to share, be it an intervention, a strategy, some learning materials, or a selection of data points perhaps that you use to measure wellbeing, and you would like to make those available to school partners and members, please do get in touch with me after the session. We'd love to feature it, and our intention is that this becomes very much a growing body of shared knowledge. To accompany the report, we also designed a graphic, which you should be able to see now. You can explore it in more detail on the website later. It's an indicative graphic, so it represents a built environment in transition. It points to the fact, again, that human, building, planetary health can't be decoupled. And it also points to the 5 themes that we use to anchor our discussions within the special interest group, namely health, environment, security, relationships, and purpose. So when you get into the detail of the graphic, it really shows us that we need to design our places to support ecological and social connectivity, to promote green and blue infrastructure, to reduce health inequalities, but also enable climate resilience. So without wishing to be too hyperbolic, as a sector, we do have an opportune moment, given the circumstances that we're living through right now, to anticipate the pressure that will continue to come and will only increase from investors, clients and tenants, our employees, our supply chain, and the public. And looking ahead towards COP26, which will be upon us before we know it, we should really be focusing on how the built environment sector can leverage these kinds of co-beneficial solutions that address global sustainability challenges. And at the school, we're really fortunate that we work alongside partners, clients, and thought leaders who keep this spirit of collaboration and joint action alive. And I'd like to extend my very warmest thanks again to the participants of the Special Interest Group for everybody's time and energy and insights. Everybody brought something to the table, and also particular thanks for everybody's patience as well, because COVID threw a bit of a spanner in our timescales. Nonetheless, here we are today, able to release the report, which will be available on the website. So on that note, I'm pleased now to hand over to Katrina, who will introduce the Health and Wellbeing Framework and give us some macro insights on wellbeing. Thanks, Katrina.
Thank you, Claire, and good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be able to join you today. Thank you, Claire, for that great introduction, and I'm so looking forward to reading the report. The insights you've shown look so interesting. Now, in my 10 minutes this morning, I'm going to talk to you all about the World Green Building Council's Health and Wellbeing Framework. This may be a project some of you were involved in. We worked closely with the Supply Chain Sustainability School over the past couple of years as we've been developing this. So it's so exciting to come to you today with this project finally being launched. My name is Katrina Brady. I'm Director of Strategy and Development at the World Green Building Council. And as a quick introduction, the World Green Building Council is a global network that comprises 70 national green building councils from around the world. You'll see them highlighted on my lovely map. The different colours represent our different regional networks. Now, each one of those green building councils is also its own membership organisation, and collectively, the World Green Building Council network represents around 36,000 organisations dedicated to sustainability in the built environment. Now, strategically, our network has highlighted 3 core areas of sustainability related to the built environment and the construction sector, the entire value chain, that as a network we are focusing on for our strategic period over the next couple of years. We created this through an in-depth alignment with the SDGs, going through all 170 targets and 230 indicators, and then narrowed that down and amalgamated that into 3 broad thematic impact areas, which are climate action, health and well-being, and resources and circularity. We have global projects that operate under each of these impact areas. The health and wellbeing one is called Better Places for People, which this work that I'll tell you about, our health and wellbeing framework, sits under. We also have established work on climate action under our Advancing Net Zero programme, and a growing body of work on resources and circularity. And these are the Green Building Councils, the network who are working together to transform the health and wellbeing in the built environment. This is the Better Places for People project that I just mentioned. And it really is truly global. As you can see, these are the GBCs that sit on the steering committee. It's a fantastically diverse number of representatives from different countries, from different continents. And it's this breadth of knowledge that led us to actually set such an ambitious and progressive, I guess, view about health and well-being. So here we have the World Green Building Council's Health and Wellbeing Framework. We launched this in November last year. We had actually 6 international events to launch it, being a global network, 1 global launch and then 5 regional launches. And we've also worked with national GBCs to support it nationally, support the national rollouts as well. But I'm going to take you through this morning a little bit of a background and tell you the story of why we did this, why we decided that we needed to put in the time to think through what health and wellbeing means for our network. I'm going to explain what the framework is, how it can be used, how it can complement the resources that you have available through the school. I'll, of course, talk through the content of the principles of the framework themselves and finish with outcomes for the sector and calls to action. So with not long with you this morning, I'll keep this very, very high level, but if you have any questions, of course, pose them in the chat box. I can pick them up afterwards or in the Q&A session. But firing straight in, why did we decide to do this framework? There are loads of frameworks out there. We don't need another one just for the sake of it. So why did we decide to update the health and wellbeing principles from the ones that we have been talking about for the last 7 years that we've been working in this space? And the answer to that really is because of the global nature of the project, the global nature of the World Green Building Council network even. And we were hearing feedback and we were understanding the responses we were getting from the Green Building Councils and their members around the world, that a lot of the health and wellbeing resources and the health-based certifications and even a lot of the case studies that we show are very focused on not only commercial buildings and the Western world, but also operational buildings. And we were hearing this great call from our network for us to be looking at a wider and more holistic approach to health and well-being, aligned with a more holistic approach to sustainability that a lot of us are taking as we align to the SDGs. Specifically on that, people were talking about economic indicators of health, environmental indicators of health, and of course the social, but wider social factors like quality of life, social impact, and looking at social impact through the value chain. So we wanted to bring in not just the direct impacts of health, the direct indicators of health in a building, but also these much wider and broader concepts. So we were aware that there was learning to do, there was research to be done, and we wanted to create something that would equip a global audience with high-level information. It can be used for education, for advocacy, and as a stepping stone for certification, because the information is all free of charge. It's available on the internet, ultimately to keep progressing and raising the ambition around health and well-being in this sector. And we ran a 2-year consultation actually to try and gather this information, to try and gather really what health and well-being should mean if we totally scrap the scope that we have so far, if we really open it up. What are the big learnings that we had within our network and beyond about where health and well-being should be looking now in this new decade? And the number one bit of feedback that we received, the most powerful learning, was that health and well-being has too long focused primarily on the building occupant. We heard this from our green building councils all over the world. We worked with private sector partners, public sector partners, the UN, the World Health Organization, And this, for me, is one of the most exciting outcomes of this, that it's taking us really into a new space for this topic of suddenly considering not just the occupants, but the people in the community, people working in the supply chain, in the construction sector, people impacted potentially by the environmental impacts of your building on the other side of the world. It totally opens up the scope. So our consultation showed us, it demonstrated from the huge number of stakeholders that we spoke to, that the sector is ready to expand its focus and bring in that element of equity. Equity and health, equitable access to health, the human right of having a healthy quality of life in a healthy built environment for everyone, everywhere. So that is the background, but what actually is it? How can it be used? The framework is a set of comprehensive guidelines. It has 6 principles. It's got 20 sub-principles that sit underneath that. And underneath each one, there is a research summary, a set of benchmarks, strategies, a resource list, design outcomes for each one. There's a huge amount of information that sits on the online version available at worldgbc.org/health-framework. There is also an executive report of about 20 pages. It's much more visual, it's easier to share, and of course, because of the global nature of our work, it's much easier to translate. So I would encourage you to have a look initially at the executive report, and then do dive into the full digital resource if you want to dig in more detail into any of the sub-principles within. In terms of how it will be used, one of our big focuses this year is to use the framework to roll out this enhanced ambition on health and well-being. We're using it as a communications tool, as a health and well-being checklist for design stage projects or for operational buildings, as a way to enhance existing certifications or to promote the use of certifications, whether that's health-based certifications like WELL or FitWell, or RESET or air-rated, or sustainability certifications generally, your BREEAM, your LEEDs, your DGNBs. And as I've mentioned before, the framework obviously can be used as an educational resource, and we're working very closely with the UKGBC team and Anna and her colleagues to support rolling out this information in a format that's easy to engage members in the industry with. And finally, also for advocacy work, something that our Green Building Councils do a great deal of, particularly at European level. So the 6 principles of this framework are: protect health, prioritize comfort, design in harmony with nature, facilitate healthy behavior, create social value, and take climate action. Those are our 6 big headlines, but underneath each of those, there are these sub-principles. There are 20 sub-principles. There's 1,000 words of detail that sits underneath each one in the full digital resource. But just to highlight quickly the scope of this framework, the breadth of topics that we're talking about, under, for example, protect and improve health, this is really some of the most traditional and fundamental elements of health and well-being that we have all been aware of for the past decade: air quality, water quality, but we as a network hadn't done enough work to recognise the impacts of the built environment on our mental health. Of course, we needed to bring in a section about infectious disease. This was happening entirely as the pandemic was kicking off last year. Under comfort, we have the well understood comfort indicators, as well as some new and more modern indicators of comfort. In terms of harmony with nature, we're looking both at indoor access to nature, looking at biophilic design, access to nature indoors, but also biodiversity, the use of nature-based solutions, access to nature outside as well, which ties into positive behaviour and health. This is both for the building occupants and the wider community. How can our buildings and cities and communities enhance activity levels, healthy lifestyles, social connectivity, and even how can we encourage healthy behaviour choices, even as far as around nutrition and hydration. For me, though, the 2 most exciting and most important areas of this framework are about the creation of social value, looking at social value across the entire supply chain, looking at human rights within the supply chain, construction workers' mental and physical health, community health, social equity, social value. And then on the environmental side, again, taking that whole life cycle approach, looking at embodied carbon, looking at operational carbon, mitigation of climate change, all from a public health perspective, adaptation and resilience, water efficiency, resource efficiency, material health, circular economy, pulling all of these issues together, but framing them in a public health message to highlight the co-beneficial approach of tackling either your health issues for environmental benefits or your environmental issues for health benefits, whichever way around you want to look at it. So I would encourage you to go and have a proper look at this framework. As I said, it's all online, it's all free of charge, and hopefully it will be a really useful resource for you all as you continue your work in this space. So just to summarize, our calls to action for the sector are that we have learned from our consultation, from our work with the World Health Organization, from this extensive journey and reflective, totally transformative journey that we've been on, really, that human health, well-being and quality of life are impacted by social, economic and environmental factors that relate to buildings and construction. The scope is so much broader than what we've been looking at previously, and the time is right now for us to look really across the entire supply chain at every single indicator of health. And that ties into one of our biggest messages, that all people across the life cycle should and must have their health protected and enhanced. It is not enough anymore for us to only think about building occupants. We have to think about every person that our building and our sector has an impact on. So our call to action for the industry is as follows: that we are calling for the built environment and construction sector to consider health, well-being and quality of life for all people impacted by the sector at all stages of the life cycle. And we hope that this framework will be one of many tools that can be used to enhance awareness of how this sector can impact and positively improve people's health and well-being. And that takes us towards our overall goal of a sustainable, healthy built environment for everyone, everywhere. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Anna Hollyman. I'm Sustainability Advisor at UK Green Building Council. My background is an architect, working in London, South East and also overseas, primarily in China. So I've kind of seen quite a wide scale of impacts of the built environment, I suppose. And for those of you who are not familiar with UKGBC, we're an industry-led network with a mission to radically improve the sustainability of the built environment by transforming the way it's planned, designed, constructed, maintained and operated. We now have over 500 members from across the value chain, from developers and consultants and contractors to manufacturers and increasingly finance institutions. And because of this, we're able to think beyond the silos our industry tends to fall into. Because fundamentally, UK Green Building Council is about bringing people together. We need to collaborate to respond to the challenges of our times. We advocate for faster change by calling for ambitious targets and progressive policy. We enable that change to happen through faster sharing of solutions and inspire by showcasing innovative best practice. And in 2021, more than ever, as both Claire and Katrina have mentioned, civil society and business are calling for greater action on climate and biodiversity crises. Calls for a green recovery and to build back better and to build back fairer are coming for all directions. And we need to move very quickly from raising awareness of the issues to implementing the solutions. So we advocate for, as I mentioned, we advocate for a built environment that enables people and planet to thrive through addressing these 5 impact areas. And today I'm going to focus on health and well-being, obviously, but what I'm really going to talk about is how World Green Building Council's new framework and how their holistic approach really emphasises how interlinked health and well-being is with other UKGBC impact areas, particularly when we take the whole life cycle approach and look at the broader socio-economic determinants of public health. because UKGBC have a long history of making the connection between the built environment and people's health and well-being, building the business case to invest in creating healthier indoor environments by highlighting the commercial benefits. We published a series of reports in collaboration with WGBC and industry leaders, focusing firstly on health and wellbeing in offices, retail, and in homes. And that work was continued by World Green Building Council as part of the Better Places for People programme that Katrina mentioned. And these reports all emphasised how the indoor environmental quality had a significant impact on people's perceptions of their working environment, for instance, which numerous studies demonstrate to have a quantifiable economic impact through indicators like staff absenteeism and turnover, and both physical and mental health. And in the midst of our third lockdown, where over 40% of workers have been working from home for extended periods of time, using this kind of evidence to really home in on how offices can support our health and well-being will be even more important as we rethink the role the traditional office environment will have in the future. And similarly, in retail environments, the indoor environmental quality will be key to whether, firstly, people feel safe going back to shops, and secondly, whether they actively choose to visit shops as opposed to just ordering online. And our homes have taken an ever greater level of importance. And even before the crisis, we knew that the NHS spends at least £2.5 billion a year treating people with illnesses directly linked to living in cold, damp, dangerous homes. Yet poor housing conditions such as overcrowding and higher density have also been associated with the greater spread of COVID-19. Homes that support our health and well-being through consideration of all these criteria are fundamental to the health of our society, both in building the new homes we need and tackling the 29 million existing homes that need to be retrofitted if we're going to meet our net zero targets. And as you just heard from Katrina, how World Green Building Council's new health and wellbeing framework really raises the ambition even higher by taking a whole life cycle approach, going beyond building occupants to really pull apart how the built environment impacts public health in many different ways and on many different levels. And as I really dug into the implications of World GBC's framework, developing a health and wellbeing course mail, which will be launched shortly, it really struck me how clearly it conveys how health and wellbeing is at the centre of each of UKGBC's impact areas and is key to the challenges that we face. And it's these relationships that I'm going to talk about here. So firstly, resource use. UKGBC and industry partners have done a huge amount of valuable work on highlighting the need for healthy materials, avoiding VOCs and issues caused by poorly designed or constructed building envelopes or inadequate ventilation. And there are a huge range of frameworks to use now to guide material selection for occupant well-being. Yet, as we start to integrate circular economy principles, we realise how small a section of the overall life cycle the in-use operational phase really is, and other stages have had very relatively little consideration in comparison. So in 2020, there are over 80,000 work-related ill health cases in construction workers, including breathing and lung problems, occupational cancers, and skin disease from exposure to fumes, chemical deaths, and environmental pollution. While lack of transparency in the construction industry supply chains can mask lower standards of working conditions and even modern slavery and exploitation, particularly in the developing world, which has a direct impact on the health and well-being of people in those countries. While on the macro scale, our increasing level of resource use has a direct impact on the health of our natural environments. 2020 saw the milestone pass where for the first time, man-made materials, particularly concrete and aggregate, outweighed everything made by nature. The natural capital and the ecosystem services that our health depends on for fundamentals like fresh air and fresh water and food systems. But nature has even wider benefits to our health, as emphasised by a recent report into nature-based solutions, the climate emergency, part of the Manchester-based Ignition project. The report brought together a wide range of evidence-based research that set out the commercially quantifiable terms, how nature benefits people. And the first aspect is removing air pollution, estimated to be responsible for circa 40,000 deaths per year in the UK alone, while both green walls and green roofs in particular have been found to be very effective in removing nitrogen dioxide and PM10 in particular. The second is our mental health, which I think most people can identify with, as it's something that has been hugely emphasised during lockdowns, as local green spaces were appreciated more than ever. And even before COVID, research found that prescribing contact with nature for people with low levels of mental health to be excellent value for money in improving people's well-being. And as also Katrina referred to, green space can encourage physical exercise, which is fundamental to healthier lifestyles. With people living in greener areas, 24% more likely to achieve recommended levels of exercise, and those living within a mile of green space, 38% more likely to exercise than those living further away. And as I mentioned before, with respect to offices, plants and views of nature enhance our productivity and reduce the levels of sick leave taken. And moving on to socioeconomic impact, just as access to green space is often impacted by socioeconomic factors, with people living in the most deprived areas likely to live less likely to live near green spaces and experience the associated health benefits. Health inequalities mean those living in the most deprived areas of England have the lowest life expectancy, with men expected to live 9.3 fewer years than those living in the least deprived areas. COVID-19 has really shone a spotlight into how socioeconomic inequality leads directly to health inequality, while those living with greatest socioeconomic deprivation had twice as high frequency of critical care admission and higher mortality rates as shown in these graphs, with the difference rates for women being even more significant than those for men. COVID has not been a great leveller, as impacts are experienced very differently across society. But the good news is that this is something that new development can directly influence through mechanisms like social value. It's increasingly possible to identify and quantify the positive social impact developments can have on local communities throughout the project lifecycle. For health and well-being, these impacts include factoring in good accessibility and sustainable transport at the design stage, incorporating high-quality public and green spaces, ensuring workers' mental and physical health is considered, and designing to improve local air quality, both during the construction phase and by thinking about the way a project is constructed in operation. And the last aspect I'm going to talk about is climate change. And there have been calls for the World Health Organization to declare climate change a public health emergency to encourage the level of investment in solutions that we've seen for the COVID-19 vaccines. Because even in the UK, climate change is already having health impacts. While there may be some positives associated with fewer deaths due to cold weather, overheating will become a greater issue, as will increased instances of extreme weather. Flooding is the second highest risk on the National Register, second only to the risk of the pandemic, which tells you something about how serious the threat of flooding is. 1 in 6 homes and businesses in England, over 5.2 million properties are already at risk of flooding and coastal erosion. And climate change means that we could see nearly 60% more winter rainfall by 2050, while summers will be hotter and drier in the future, with summer rains 25% more intense than now. The risk of flooding will only increase. But it's the human impact of floods that can be most significant for health, with flood victims 9 times more likely to experience long-term health issues like anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. And the mental health impacts associated with understanding climate change are also becoming an issue, with reports of eco-anxiety escalating, particularly among children and young people, with just over 3/4 of students saying that thinking about climate change makes them anxious. But it's important to note that eco-anxiety is not a diagnosis or a disorder. It's a rational anxiety that scientist Owen Gafferty asserts is the right response to the scale of the challenge. But he adds, I'm an optimist. To note that eco-anxiety, I'm an optimist. We live in an age where individuals have more power than at any time in history. Look at your sphere of influence, employer, networks, family, and influence them. We don't need to convince 100% of people, only 25%. And then an idea can go from marginal to mainstream. The science is loud and clear and simple. We need to halve global emissions of greenhouse gases by 2030. All the solutions exist to do that, and if we implement them, more people will be living in cleaner cities, eating healthy diets, and working in resilient, buoyant economies. Because as fundamentally important as a net zero built environment is, our long-term well-being is key. UKGBC have just published this research into the just transition, because as part of our transition to a net zero built environment, it's critical that we avoid deepening existing inequalities and the associated impacts on our public health, and support a just transition that improves lives and livelihoods, levels up across communities, and leaves no one behind. So for that reason, I second Katrina's call for action for us to be working towards a sustainable, healthy built environment for everyone, everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. That's terrific. And just going to hand over to Tim now to speak from Grosvenor's point of view. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm really grateful to the Supply Chain Sustainability School for hosting this event and for asking me to talk on what is just such an important topic, as you've already heard. So my thanks to Claire and the SCSS, and particularly to the Wellbeing Special Interest Group for obviously hosting this webinar and producing their excellent report, which I thoroughly recommend. It's well worth reading. My name's Tim Francis. I'm the Director of Research at Grosvenor, Britain and Ireland, and I'm going to talk to you. I spend a little bit of time talking about GBI's approach to wellbeing in our properties and our places, and I want to briefly mention an exciting and ambitious new piece of research on community wellbeing, which we recently launched. So I will move us forward. So for those of you who don't know Grosvenor, Britain and Ireland, and more broadly Grosvenor, we're a property developer, owner and manager. We're experts in making and managing neighbourhoods, and we've got a long experience of pioneering change, which we've acquired over 300 years. So you probably know us for our heartland in London's West End, where we support nearly 1,000 businesses and thousands of residents and workers each day. That is in normal times. We also invest, however, in new neighbourhoods elsewhere in London, thinking about Bermondsey, but also outside London, in Liverpool and across the southeast of England, in Oxford and Cambridge. We're one part of a global privately owned family business of property companies, but that means that we can act patiently and think long term, and we give equal weight to the social, commercial and environmental impact of everything that we do. So what do we want to be known for? We want to be known for making and managing great places that inspire community success. And I'll come on to talk about what we mean by that. And we also want to lead the way in tackling climate change. So the success of the business is linked to the success of our tenants and the places that we manage for those groups. And that's why community success matters so much to us, and why we think of residents and tenants as our partners. Our ambition over the next 5 years is to nurture a dynamic, thriving economy in each neighbourhood of all of our places, and improve people's well-being and their quality of life. And I'll talk to you about how we're going to try and do that. So, as I said, we're in the process of defining specific baselines and targets for each of those areas, and we're trying to look beyond gross value added as a kind of traditional community outcome metric and more towards community well-being and quality of life. So just to talk you through some of the things that we're doing. So firstly, last year we launched our community charter called Positive Space, which aimed to set a new standard for public engagement across our business and ensure that communities have a meaningful voice in the future of their neighbourhoods. So it sets out 4 principles to guide how we engage with people in our places, and the people who play a critical part in the day-to-day neighbourhood life, from residents to businesses and institutions to community organisations and amenity societies. And these 4 principles are to listen first. We always start by listening to the people who, are living in and working in the places that we manage. We're going to be very open and transparent with all of those people in terms of our ambitions and our goals. We want to try and make things easier for people. We're trying to solve problems and make people's lives easier. So our places are, as I said, great places to live and work in. And of course, we want to be accountable. So we're being very focused on, matching our goals and aspirations to those of the community. So, there's nowhere to hide. We're being very open and transparent and accountable. And we've already started delivering on a lot of these commitments. So, for example, in October, we launched Voice Opportunity Power, which is a national youth engagement toolkit designed to give young people aged 11 to 18 real influence over the changes in their neighborhoods. We want the places we make and manage to work for everyone, and we recognize that young people sometimes are not well heard. So, we're really focusing on hearing from that group. We're currently running toolkit sessions with groups of a group of 20 young people in Westminster who have joined our Mayfair Youth Forum. For the first time in the history of the area, we're actively inviting young people to have a say in the way that this part of London gets made and managed. And work is starting on our site in Bermondsey last year, where we're delivering more than 1,500 homes for rent and a school, as well as everything you might expect and you might need from breakfast to bedtime within a short walk. In 2018, we commissioned a Southwark-based independent organisation called Social Life to carry out a neighbourhood study in relation to our Bermondsey scheme. And that's really to help us understand and respond to local needs. It included interviews, surveys and peer research by the Southwark Young Advisors to build a comprehensive picture of the local area. And that's something that's very much part of our strategy going forward, which I'll talk to you about. So we recognise that local priorities may have changed since that original study. So we're having ongoing engagement, and we're setting up a community forum for local representatives to discuss, their key topics as times are changing. And clearly, since 2018, with the onset of or the COVID pandemic, priorities and focuses do change. So we're really alive to that, and as I said, being very accountable. And finally, just thinking from the environmental perspective, we're always trying to find innovative ways to improve well-being in our communities, but at the same time, and not to the exclusion of benefiting the environment, which we've heard is such a critical issue. So at the end of 2020, we launched our pathway to net zero called Think Zero, and that's setting out how we as an organisation are aiming to become a zero carbon business by 2030. As we've heard, 2030 is such a key date in the future. And that's very much affecting all of the things that we're working on, including that large build to rent development in Bermondsey, which I mentioned. As you'll see in the report when it's launched, we've also recently partnered with Airlite, and with the first UK landlord to adopt groundbreaking environmentally friendly paint to drive sustainability, air quality and wellbeing across our London portfolio. So it's something we're taking very seriously. So finally, I just want to talk to you about this exciting research project which we launched at the end of last year, and we think is a really unique program of research into community wellbeing in our places, and that means understanding wellbeing right across all of the communities in our very diverse places, from residents and students to workers, shoppers, as well as domestic and international visitors. So, we think it's hugely ambitious in its scope. And while well-being isn't a new concept, there's plenty of academic and applied evidence that we can draw on. We feel it's really important to start right at the beginning in terms of building up that really clear picture and understanding of what well-being means to the communities in our places and what influences it. So we want to be really clear about the what and the how of well-being, and that's going to help us, we think, maximize our chances of positively impacting it. So we'll be using a combination of primary and secondary research to do that, which is going to involve, when we're able to really get into the communities and talk to them about their priorities and what they see as being positive in terms of well-being. And obviously we're going to be drawing heavily on academic theory, industry best practice, and in the process collating a huge amount of high quality data, which is going to really help us track how we're doing and move forward. And as I said, one of the goals of the research is to use the findings to guide our investment and development strategies, which, as I've explained, is at the core of us helping to improve community well-being. So, we're going to be tracking our progress, being accountable on those goals moving forward, and it's something we want to be really transparent about, and obviously continuing, a really close community engagement over time, which is such a vital part of the overall, drive of improving well-being. So that's all I was going to say. Again, thank you very much for listening. Thank you for the invitation to speak. And please do send any questions you've got through the chat function. So I'm going to hand back to Claire now.
Brilliant, Tim. Thank you so much. And we'll hand over, this lovely synergy here, we're going to hand over to Chris from Airlite, who Tim just mentioned in his presentation. Thank you, Chris.
Oh, thank you. It's almost as though someone put an agenda together. Thanks for the heads up, Tim. Really appreciate that. So thank you very much for your time. We're going to run a bit through Airlite and the innovation that is Airlite. So a bit of the background, Airlite was really founded to disrupt the paint space. Airlite represents the next generation of paint as we see it, with the intention to transform what have traditionally been passive elements of our buildings, most of the surfaces, that we traditionally cover with coloured chemicals to make places feel nice and to seal the surfaces. So the real crux of Airlite was to look to nature. If you examine what goes on in nature in terms of the health and well-being of the planet around us, surfaces aren't passive. They're one of the most common elements in nature that do good. Leaves, for example, absorbing nutrients, breaking down toxins and purifying the air, right down to the soil and the way it interacts. So that was the crux of Airlite. Can we really transform the surfaces into elements that go beyond trying to limit the impact on environment to being part of the solution? And the good news is, yes, we can. So why? I appreciate speaking to an audience here of people who know probably a lot more about this than me. But the crux of it really was trying to solve what is the greatest threat to humanity at the moment in terms of air pollution. So some 7 million deaths attributed to the air that we breathe. And as science evolves, we're starting to understand more and more about how that is impacting every organ of our body. It's not just respiratory disease. As I've shown a couple of examples on there, right from dementia through heart disease to how the humans develop as fetus in the womb, right through to development and growth and how our cognitive function develops as children and later on in life. And that's not surprising if we stop and think about it for a minute. We're absolutely obsessed by this stuff. We would think about, oh, well, what's right to drink? I would never drink this if it looked dirty, if it was messy. Yeah, I drink typically 10 to 15 times a day. Most of it's filtered and passes through me. I eat 3 to 4 times a day. That takes about an hour to get processed by us. And we've never seen a movement in the food space, as we saw with the vegan movement that started a couple of years ago, as people really started to take interest in what we eat. Yet we ignore what we breathe. When we breathe some 20,000 times a day, and the toxins that we're breathing in can be in major blood vessels in our brain in seconds. Not minutes, not hours, but seconds, 20,000 times a day, and we ignore it. So it's starting to become evident why it has such a big impact on our health and well-being. It's also interesting that it's not just outdoor air that is the problem. We traditionally link outdoor air to being the source of all evil. We see dirty taxis, dirty buses, power stations, etc., pumping out a load of stuff that we don't want to be breathing. But the air inside our buildings started off outside. We don't have magic air generators in the corner of buildings. We bring that air in, and then we add pollutants to it. So again, there's growing research into this area. There's all manner of numbers bandied around, but typically seems to be achieved that it can be up to 5 to 10 times worse than outdoors, which again isn't surprising when we look at what we do to it when we bring it into the building. The first thing, if we've got some fairly advanced HVAC plant on the roof, is that it might pass through a series of filters. So we might take out some of the particulate matter. Not a lot of those interact with the gases, actually. Then it comes into the building. Then we add the pollutants as shown on the chart. So the building materials, certainly as interest at the moment, the increase in washing and cleaning. So we're not cleaning our walls and our surfaces with the finest little rose petals. It's generally solvents, it's man-made chemicals with VOCs in products that aren't improving our air quality. They're often detrimental to it. Then we have our furnishings, everything else that we're putting in it. We have ourselves, my deodorant, hairspray, everything that we're wearing. Office equipment, so electrically charging some of the air and forming secondary pollutants to be created. So all manner of elements inside the building. And while we're all sat here thinking, whoa, dirty, dirty offices, it's the same in our homes. We open the window, we bring the air in, and we add pollutants to it. We still use deodorant at home, we still clean things. It's exactly the same. And this has been evidenced with a lot of the research into COVID. So some research says now up to 95% of COVID transmissions occur indoors because we don't have nature outside purifying the air inside until now. So one of the bases we started with Airlite was actually looking to nature. Why is it we can walk outside and climb a mountain and still breathe fresh air? Well, that comes down to a very simple reaction that happens in the Earth's atmosphere. The first stage of which is actually the splitting of water molecules in the air. So splitting humidity around us. We've got energy from light, we've got all the pollutants mixing together, and as shown on the little graphic there, H2O, so a water molecule, splits off one hydrogen atom from that and creates an OH- ion, technically termed a hydroxyl radical. Now this hydroxyl radical is highly uncomfortable being on its own. It wants to latch onto all of the pollutants. So it links onto a nitrogen atom or oxygen atom, whatever it gets into, and starts a chain reaction. Thus, the air is purified. So for example, nitrogen dioxide. Nitrogen is not toxic. Oxygen is not toxic, but nitrogen dioxide is toxic. One of the most common gases from combustion, so from vehicles. So breaking it down into its raw form purifies the air. So that's nature. So that's where we started with Airlite. What we've managed to do is replicate these reactions in nature in a paint. So we have a product with no VOCs in it. It is the greenest of green paints to start with. We can embed the catalysts in it, as shown in the graphic on the bottom left, and then you can paint walls with it. It does the job of paint. Paint colors walls. It does it without chemicals as well, which is really nice as a starter for 10. Then beyond that, at the surface, we can replicate the reactions we see in nature, which means we split moisture molecules in the air. We split humidity. That then causes these ions to be created that latch onto pollutants and break the pollutants down in the same way that we see in nature. They also do the same to bacteria and viruses, as shown in the other graphics there. So the central graphic depicting the virus that we've all become familiar to see now. The radical, the ions, latch onto the viral spike protein around the edge and oxidize the virus, sucking the oxygen out of it as they want to convert themselves back into their steady state of water. thus killing the virus and the bacteria. So Airlite goes way beyond normal antibacterial paints, where you might have an antibacterial or an antibiotic or a biocide or chemicals within it that mean the surface is inhospitable, to create these ions that actively break down and kill the viruses and the bacteria. So we have tested Airlite against influenza A stripe. We have tested it against SARS virus and recently against human coronavirus, so the family of COVID-19, and it has killed them all effectively. We are queuing for the test of COVID-19, as with every man and his dog, but we cannot get that test conducted at the moment. But we successfully have killed every virus and bacteria that we have tested Airlite with. The result is really the simplest solution to improving the built environment around us. Looking at the top there, the environmental benefits, the 4 green lines. So this is the realm of eco paints. So we have the lowest CO2 footprint of environmentally friendly paints. The reason being, Airlite is actually produced from powder. It's produced from calcium carbonate, which is the byproduct of marble production. So where marble slabs are being cut, we're getting fine dust. That's pure calcium carbonate. We use that as the raw material to produce Airlite. Thus, we have a cold manufacturing process, completely fueled by renewable energy, and we ship it in powder form, so we're not shipping liters of liquids around the planet either. As mentioned there, we have no VOCs in Airlite. The reason being, the production of these ions attack VOCs. So if we had VOCs in the paint, they would attack them themselves. So others are trying to create this technology themselves using liquid-based products. You have to have an element of solvents or materials in there to keep the product in liquid form. Thus, you're decreasing the effectiveness and you're not actually allowing the product to break down the pollutants as effectively as they could. We're cradle to cradle gold. As I said already, we're based from recycled or reused materials in that waste product from the marble processing. Perfectly aligned to LEED, WELL, ESG credits, etc., etc. Then we go beyond paint. So comparing us to eco paints, we're ahead of the game. If we compare us to other retrofit measures, as a couple of people mentioned living in green walls, we go beyond the effectiveness of plants and trees in terms of breaking down pollution. We're naturally antiviral and antibacterial, so surfaces do not need cleaning and scrubbing. And as shown there, cleaning and disinfectant actually deteriorates indoor air quality. And we prohibit the molds and spores growth on the surface, but also break them down well airborne. And Airlite also neutralizes smells, just the same way that nature does. It doesn't filter these out. It doesn't pass anything through the surface. We create the ions. The magical ions do the rest. In terms of ROI, we are price matched to eco paints. So we're slightly more than your run-of-the-mill Dulux wall paint. If you want a standard, cheap, simple paint to color a wall, Airlite is not that. But if we're looking at green paints that make a difference, if we're looking at paints that go beyond that, and certainly if we're looking at other options for purifying the air, we're as simple as paint. It can't get more simpler. There's no retrofit. There's no irrigation systems. There's no changing of filters. There's no maintenance involved in it. It's paint. You paint it on the wall. It does the job of paint. The time and complexity install is something a 5-year-old child can do. It's painting a wall. And the plus side of it as well, as I'll cover in a minute, is the opportunity for marketing and exposure. So we always get into this topic of, well, it costs more than our standard paint. And we know it does all the good, but how do we prove it? Well, shout about it. That's part of what we're doing here, is really leading the way of making a difference. So on that note, everything I've run through there has been backed up by extensive academic research at independent institutions and laboratories, including the COVID tests. So I'm happy to share those. But we've also done a number of field trials with a few strategic clients, one being Grosvenor. So there's a few of you on the call today. I'm sure you've heard about this many times. But we undertook the trials with Grosvenor to really prove this in situ. One of which was the painting of an office. So 2 adjoining offices, one was painted in Dulux, one was painting in Airlite at identical times. And then air quality monitors were put in, independent air monitoring, and the results tracked over the course of 3 to 4 weeks. The chart on the bottom right shows toxic nitrogen dioxide levels in those offices. And the one painted in Airlite reduced nitrogen dioxide by over 50% at head height in those offices over the identical period of time. On Tor Burrows, Director of Sustainability and Innovation at Grosvenor, made a statement and put this out on the website as to the groundbreaking innovation really leading the way in terms of addressing environmental topics, but also in terms of care and welfare for employees and customers. We've also partnered with WSIG. So WSIG have signed a partnership with us that was so interesting. CNBC covered it, and over in the US actually, and we ended up being pulled over there prematurely. But part of the journey with WSIG was looking at schools. So WSIG painted Airlite following the methodology in one classroom and then put air quality monitors into the adjoining classrooms and tracked the toxin level over the course of a month. The chart in the bottom right-hand corner again shows toxic nitrogen dioxide levels. The reason we keep referring to that is because a lot of air quality monitoring data looks at temperature, humidity, carbon dioxide, and neglects the core topics that the World Health Organization says are the toxins that are killing us. So what we see there, the dashed line is the EU and the World Health Organization limit level, the 1 hour mean for the top one. So we've got incidences days where we are double that level in these classrooms. The blue line at the bottom on the chart is the identical classroom painted in Airlite, where we reduced nitrogen dioxide over 90% and took it below the annual mean limit level. The table on the bottom left-hand corner was the environmental data and research undertaken by WSIG themselves, so EPD data publicly available. So VOCs, the leading train paint in this case was Dulux Trade. So we more or less eliminated the VOCs. We eliminated hazardous waste from painting, and that is over the entire building life cycle, and reduced the carbon footprint by over 60%. So looking at painting one classroom, that reduced the footprint by over 64 kilograms in that instance. Just looking beyond that, we've also worked in terms of credibility. We've worked with a number of brands across different verticals. So we have a partnership with IKEA where they've used us in store and for some of their marketing campaigns around their IKEA Loves Earth approach. We painted parts of Kensington Palace, JLL's head office, and we're now working on a customer offering for JLL. We painted the Airbus manufacturing site in Barcelona. Mercedes-Benz ran a campaign with us where if you're buying an electric vehicle, why not paint your home with Airlite as well, as shown at the tin there, because why should you breathe other people's pollution if you're not pumping it out yourselves, in theory. And Decathlon through the retail side. So to finish, I know I keep mentioning it, but it is a drop-in solution. It really is. It's simple as painting walls. It's a direct substitute to regular paint, reduces the environmental impact straight away over the building life cycle. Once applied, it purifies the air that we're breathing. It replicates the reactions we see in nature without the use of any chemicals, solvents, or nasties to produce a cleaner and healthier indoor environment. Meanwhile, it's permanently antimicrobial and antiviral. It's available in 180 colors. It's fire rated class 0 and can be applied by anyone. And the strap line at the top there was one that IKEA ran with themselves. So in comparison to green walls as well, 100 square meters painted with Airlite is as effective as 100 square meters of mature trees in terms of purifying the air. So that's it. I'd like to say, I think that shows that we're trying to go beyond reducing environmental impact in what is traditionally a chemical industry to actually being part of the solution and undoing some of the damage that's been done. So I thank you all for your time and hand back to Claire.
Chris, thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic, and you've sparked quite a lot of comments in the chat. I have lifted some of the questions out of the chat. I suspect we're going to be very pressed for Q&A, but I will, if you have submitted a question for Chris that is about technical, the technical spec, I will pass these on. So he can come back to you. But I'm going to hand over now to Sam, last but certainly not least, for the final session actually of today, and then we will take some questions. So Sam, over to you. Thank you for waiting so patiently.
we developed this guide, and basically in response to industry requests. So we had a steering group, a consultation group that was made up of all sorts of the major contractors, so Balfour Beatty, BAM, Murphy's, Heathrow, TfL, Galliford Try, Kier, Costain, all the big players like that were sitting around the table as we developed this guide. We tried to define well-being, and we spent a long time talking about it, and then realized actually, you know, we kind of all had a really good grasp of what we were talking about, and actually the Oxford English Dictionary definition was perfectly good enough for us to just go ahead with. Taking that one step further, though, we did break it down into the main themes of body and mind, and culture and environment. So we kind of went from the internal, the personal in terms of body and mind, to the external in terms of physical environment and our cultural environment, our relationships, if you like. So there's another two kind of angles there. So we're looking at the mind and the culture as on one kind of paradigm, and then body and physical environment on another. So there are different axes to this. And the guide itself outlines 19 sub-issues, and it really identifies good practice on all of those 19 different issues. We also outline a framework for a strategic approach. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel particularly here, so as I'll take you through it in a little bit, but suffice to say, we guide you through how to develop your own framework and strategy. Okay, so here are the issues. I was slightly surprised by these. I thought we would have things like stress and heart disease and things like that, but actually we didn't. The consultation group felt that these were the priority issues, and it was the consultation group themselves that we during a workshop voted on the different issues and which ones were the most significant. And here you have the list of those. So there's between 4 and 6 for each of those different areas. And in the guide itself, we drill down into best practice, good practice, things you might want to cover, and some ideas for how you can work on each of those. So we had, for stigma of mental health, for example, we had Stephen from Mates in Mind who came along and gave us a really good insight into mental health and the stigma of mental health. And then, for example, in terms of diet and nutrition and hydration, we give some advice and guidance around that as well. So let me click on. In terms of strategy, what we didn't want to do was reinvent the wheel. So we know that most businesses already have several different management systems running in their operations. And really the key to getting this all right is integration, and not having a kind of a very separate drive on well-being that isn't, for example, linked into health and safety or sustainability or quality or any of the other management systems that you might be running. So ISO themselves, the International Standards Organization that wrote ISO 14001 and 9001, the environmental and quality standards, have developed Annex SL, which outlines the key elements of any strategy. So all we really need to do is take that Annex SL and just feed in sustainability, or in this case, well-being, into the front end of that. And then we just manage the process through that methodology. The things that we would really add to that is this initial review. So it's really good idea to get an understanding of where you are in well-being terms initially. So that might be surveys, it might be questionnaires, it might be interviews that you want to carry out to give yourself a baseline of understanding of where you are. And then finally, at the very other end of the whole process, and some kind of external report. I increasingly feel that we should have some kind of benchmark to compare different organizations on. You know, we're very familiar with it in terms of BREEAM or the WELL standard in terms of how the building performs, but how about having the same kind of thing in terms of different companies and their performance as well? So the other angle I wanted to talk about, and something we do quite a lot of training on, is nature and well-being. We do a course on eco-anxiety, and I think it was Anna that mentioned that eco-anxiety is a very natural response, and I think that's absolutely true. It is the burning platform that we very much need in terms of to give ourselves a thrust in the right direction, and we need to use that anxiety and use that understanding of the problem to drive us forward in terms of what we do and how we tackle well-being and sustainability. Suffice to say that, you know, we are intimately linked into nature, and Chris was, you know, highlighting how that happens on a very, very personal level with every breath that we take. I have an oximeter these days, not because of the pandemic, but actually just because I was interested in it anyway. And you can very much see that if you take a large, deep breath, that about 20 seconds later, your oxygen levels spike at the tip of your finger. And that's because you've just absorbed those very molecules from the air. And so we're incredibly tied into our natural environment. Everything we drink comes from natural processes, and everything we eat and everything we ever will eat comes from some sort of natural process and was mainly at one point living. There are some tiny exceptions to that in terms of artificial flavorings, colorings, and preservatives, and they're not very good for us. So obviously the natural environment provides our life support systems, and we need to look after it in order to promote our own well-being. We also know that psychologically speaking, we come from this environment. We very much are products of evolution. We were produced by the ecosystems that we now rely on for our survival. You know, we have bacteria on our hands, in our guts, all over us, little animals living on us. We are habitats as well. We are part of these ecosystems. We are an ecosystem. So it's no wonder then that when we're out in nature, we have a kind of a resonance with it, that it reduces our stress and anxiety, that it can make us feel connected to the rest of life and therefore part of something larger, which is really, really important in our well-being. It also gives us this sense that we belong, and we very much do belong in the natural environment. And it also gives us this absolutely fundamental thing of purpose and role. When we understand the problem of sustainability really properly, when we understand the importance of well-being, then I think it puts us on a path towards having a purpose in a role as well. And that is to promote well-being and to promote sustainability. So in terms of practice, you know, there's been a lot of research into how we develop a good practice around sustainability and well-being. Sports psychology, I think, has been absolutely fascinating in highlighting how our psychology interacts with what we do. So very much in the past, we've always set goals and targets for ourselves. And it's not to say that those aren't important, they very much are. But if we focus on the process itself, the actual enjoying of the very moment, we bring in that kind of mindful approach to being. And actually our well-being is massively increased. So focusing on the process, not just the goals, are really, really significant. If we can get that right, we can enter into this flow state that's often spoken about as this kind of nirvana of being, where we kind of forget time, we get so engrossed in what we're doing, we're absorbed by it, we're fulfilled by it, and it gives us all these psychological benefits. That's a very, very important stage to be in, or a place to get into if we possibly can. In terms of our work, that's absolutely central. We work most effectively when we can get into that flow state. And that's really done best by focusing on the process itself. And then finally, if I could just do a quick plug for awareness of our connections. So, you know, when we all feel very isolated these days, or potentially we all feel isolated these days in our homes and separated, it's really important to remember that connection that we have both with nature and with each other. And just to highlight that, I found this really lovely quote from from John Muir. And it goes like this: this grand show is eternal. It is always sunrise somewhere. The dew is never all dried at once. A shower is forever falling and vapor ever rising. I feel that that's a kind of quote that we can all take away and muse upon and enjoy at a distance the nature that one day hopefully we'll be able to access again more fully. Okay, so that's myself. Claire, if I could hand back to you. I hope you got most of that.
We did indeed. Thank you, Sam. Rapidly reaching the end of our time. So what I'm going to do is pose a couple of questions and then we're going to hand over for a wrap up. So one for Anna and Katrina, either one of you really, or both, is how that there've been a few questions about how organisations can adopt the health and wellbeing framework in their projects. Is any registration necessary, and are we working towards a formal certification or verification method?
I can speak to this first. Thank you so much for this question. The quick answer is that the health and wellbeing framework is not a certification. We aren't trying to make it a certification. There are so many in the market already. We want it to be a high-level set of guiding principles that sets the ambition for where a certification should go. So there isn't the opportunity to get that third-party verification in the same way that you would if you did a WELL assessment or BREEAM or anything else. However, that doesn't mean that the principles can't be adopted. And I mean, it also means you can adopt them without any price uplift or anything like that. The information is totally free online. On the full digital resource, in each sub-principle, there is an outcome of best practice, summarising what the research says about each specific area of health and sustainability. Then there's a recommended list of strategies that you can use to incorporate that specific health and sustainability indicator into your building or project, and then a range of benchmarks, and then a list of more information. So there's not just one methodology or option or performance metric that you're trying to hit, but instead there's lots of different ways in which a global audience can try and implement that specific strategy or implement that specific outcome in a way that suits them. And as I mentioned in the chat box, we're going to be investing this year in creating more resources to support people using it and make it a little bit easier. But for now, the full online resource is where you'll find all that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Katrina. Anna, any comments from you?
Not especially, just to reiterate that we've started looking at how the framework applies in the UK, and we're launching a course mail shortly, which gives an indication of how it can be applied and where it's most relevant, I suppose. Wonderful.
That would be great. I think especially from the supply chain perspective, understanding what support and advice there is for suppliers in this would be brilliant. On that note, I'm going to turn to, and I think I will make this the last question. It's one for Tim, really, with the, I'm thinking about Grosvenor's fantastic supply chain charter. Chris, you may like to comment as well, just on your perspective, from your perspective as a supplier. But how is wellbeing playing out in the procurement process for Grosvenor?
Well, thank you. I mean, it's a great question. It's something that, you know, as you've alluded to, the supply chain charter is, you know, is one of our principal, I suppose, levers in delivering that. So, you know, we've set out in there again a whole load of different principles about you know, how we expect our suppliers to you know, to essentially be, I suppose, behaving in terms of the you know, how they're treating their workforce, their own suppliers. So we're and that being aligned with, as I described, you know, our broader social benefit goals. So we're very much driven by that, and so, you know, the supply chain charter is absolutely fundamental to how we're doing that. And, you know, actually we're finding you know, the uptake of that has been really good. I think it's, apart from anything, it's been a really good education process for you know, people across our supply chain. So, you know, very positive, and as I said, it's a cornerstone of how we're you know, achieving positive wellbeing outcomes.
Brilliant, thank you, Tim. And Chris, have you got comments? on that and what you're seeing, really, because obviously you're supplying to a great number, an ever-increasing number of companies.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's where you see the difference between the companies that truly do embrace this and live it through their values and their supply chain, rather than the companies that it's just espoused values and, well, let's do one little thing and let's shout about it and then move on to the next one. So I think from our side, it really stands out and highlights that. And everyone we've worked with, obviously we're fortunate that, well, most of them are on this attendees actually, but are involved in that and truly passionate about it. And I mean, the experience with Grosvenor, we were introduced to the supply chain very early on, and it was a holistic approach to it. It wasn't a top down or a bottom up, it was everyone involved in it and the process throughout. So the benefits were evident for everyone. And I think that's key for it to truly work, because if it's just solely top up or bottom down, at some point you hit resistance, particularly when it comes to legal contracts that have been signed, etc., etc. So getting everyone involved and around a table and making sure everyone understands the benefits and also everyone does realise the benefits has been key.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Right, I'm going to hand over briefly to Andrew Day, who's our lovely chair of the Wellbeing Special Interest Group, he's got the job of wrapping this session up, and I'll hand over to you now. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, Claire. A very, very quick overview. Hello, I'm Andrew. I had the privilege to collaborate with the SIG as its chairperson. I'd like to share a few closing remarks with you. And also, I've got a handful of asks I'm going to set out, please. First, I want to thank the SIG and its contributors, beginning in the pre-COVID world in 2019. We knew at that time the importance of the SIG's dialogue, good practice, sharing, and the importance of mainstreaming of the framework for wellbeing will be of fundamental importance to our sector, preparing for the 2020s and the new decade ahead. But of course, we had no idea what would lie ahead. So thank you to the school, to Claire, and to the contributors to the report. My first ask, please continue emailing, sharing your organisation's current wellbeing learnings to the school, so we can help mainstream our existing commitments and encourage our peers and supply chains to share their programmes and stories. Thank you to each of our exceptional speakers today for sharing their rich and diverse commitments and evolving stories. Now is the time to help us reset and look ahead, hence my second ask. If you are starting a new wellbeing programme and or have ambitions to do so, please share your future learnings so that we can share more widely. My third ask is for each of us to go back to our homes, businesses and communities to make a difference each day. So please reflect on the wellbeing framework, its 5 principles, and all the lessons learned that our speakers have shared with us today. Through collaboration, the built environment operates as a placemaker. When done well, this helps us unify all sectors to deliver an environmental, societal and economic benefits and a better quality of life for all generations. So, as we lead up to COP26, we have a grand opportunity to crystallise and exemplify our companies and organisations' efforts. So please get involved and make a difference. My fourth ask, Claire has penned a book of Livable Cities, which we published in the lead up to COP. So please read and to continue to share your stories with the school and Claire. And whilst I might be a little bit premature, Claire, my fifth ask, I said there'll be a handful, is for us all to encourage Claire to write a sequel. I look forward to seeing you virtually for the time being, but in person at future school events and participating in forthcoming meetings and special interest groups. In the meantime, take care and to continue to make a difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I appreciate the request for a sequel. I'll come back to you. Right, that concludes our event, everybody. Thank you so much again for your time this morning. Please do share your feedback. Please access the report, let us know what you think, and we look forward to continuing this conversation. Thanks so much.